Today's topic is alchemy, and that's what we're going to be looking at. And I'll write that up on the board here for a second. Can everybody see that okay? All right, so you see that word alchemy. What comes to mind for you?
10th grade.
10th grade. Okay, well, we'll go with grade 10. I'll put up anything you have to say. You have to take that further, though. What do you mean by 10th grade? Why? What does it mean to you? What did you learn about alchemy in 10th grade? Or if you weren't here in 10th grade, what does alchemy mean to you?
Precursor to chemistry.
Precursor to chemistry. All right?
It's like trying to figure out what
So precursor to chemistry, who just said that? Just I see a face go with it. So Allie, changing from something that would change something to gold.
I don't remember 10th grade, but I remember.
You don't have to remember grade 10. I just really want your knowledge about what you know, so that's fine. So changing one substance to another. And I'm going to use your example. So a metal to gold. Okay? Anybody else? Alchemy.
Hermes.
Yeah.
Trying to achieve immortality.
Oh, okay. Trying to achieve immortality. I'm assuming everybody is aware of immortality, what that means, but in this sense it means being able to extend my life forever, have an afterlife that maybe is more meaningful than my present life. Okay? Anybody else? Alchemy. Say that again? The book, The Alchemist. Let's throw that up here. Great book. Have you read it?
Yeah,
Did you like it?
I love it.
Can you tell the others in the audience what was the main plot of The Alchemist?
It was more about symbology in one's life and how a young man named Santiago, he sees a dream about a treasure and then he goes in search of it and then he overcomes all the obstacles in his way and finds it finally. Was he going to be destiny?
Okay. So the book The Alchemist is about one main character, the protagonist, a male, and he is a young man searching for the meaning of life, essentially. So to take that, it kind of goes back to this idea of trying to achieve immortality, or what does that mean to have that destiny in a sense, right? Great book. I highly recommend it. Anybody else? Look at the word itself. What do you see in the word alchemy? Alchem, okay. What does alchem mean to you? Why does that focus on for you, Oren? Just does? Okay. Anybody? I had one person one time when I did this lecture many years ago say to me, if you looked at this idea of alchem, if I just switch a couple of letters around, chemal. Insert chemical, right? So to go back to, I don't remember who said it, someone said precursor to chemistry, right? That was the road that took us that way. How many of you have studied alchemy before? Okay. What are some of your memories of that study of alchemy? When you studied it before, where did you begin when you studied it? Philosopher's Stone. How many of you have heard of the Philosopher's Stone before? Anybody have a recollection of what it essentially means? Anybody? Do you want to take Harry Potter? Okay, yeah, the Harry Potter, use it as a basis. You see a lot of these references in other places. Okay, but the Philosopher's Stone goes back to this idea of trying to achieve immortality. It was looking for that secret elixir of life that would allow me to be able to extend myself forever. Okay? So let's switch focus for just a second. What are you studying right now? And why in the world would they invite me here to talk about alchemy on this particular day and time? Because it's not random that I'm here. So what are you guys studying right now? Say it again?
Algebraic mentality.
The algebraic mentality. Perfect. So what does that mean to you? Maria?
Might be related because the alchemy kind of combines both the science and the belief with something extraordinary.
All right.
Symbology and facts. It's
Um,
kind of a combination of the old mentality and the new one.
okay. And I'm going to put underneath this and I'm going to put a plural there, old mentalities, because mentalities never go away. They're subsumed and they become part of the current. So it's going back to your arithmetic mentality as well as your geometric mentality.
It's like they still believe in symbology, but they try to find more calculating through science, through actual studies, chemistry, and substances.
So you're looking at chemistry, you're looking at substances, you're looking at the symbology of that language.
To understand what does it mean and
What does it mean? Okay. All right, great. Anybody else want to tell me about what you know about the algebraic mentality right now?
Based on abstract thought.
Based on abstract thought, okay? And that goes along with symbology, right? As well, if you'd agree with that. Anything else? What are some of the artifacts, archetypes, characteristics that you've been talking about that define this mentality, that make it different from the two previous? Arithmetic was defined by what? How would you define the arithmetic mentality? Listing, enumeration, you know, I for I, 1, 2, 3, going through from that standpoint, right? How would you define the geometric mentality? Say it again? Representational in what way? How would you define representational? It's a good buzzword. Structure, right? What was the archetype of that mentality, the geometric mentality? Hierarchy, and we see it in the form of a temple, right? Did you guys learn about temples, talk about the ziggurat, the idea of everything pointing up to the heavens, right? Looking at that alignment, looking at sacred measurements, so to speak, right? So then all of that becomes part of what you're seeing in the algebraic. And in this case, in the algebraic, as you start to point out, it's about symbolism, right? It's about the idea of, you know, when you were in 8th grade, you might have studied courtly love, and you were looking at the poetry, and you were looking at allegories. You studied algebra, right? So you start to see it becomes more abstract. I'm using symbols to represent reality, correct? Hence comes the beginning of our study of alchemy. So I'm going to take you on a tour. And this is a little bit different because I'm going to ask you to participate with me in reading the symbology of the art of the time. So let's do another backwards moment for a second. What role does art play in culture? Someone said it? What role does art play in culture, in your opinion? Yeah, it's stories and information, right? It gives me something to look at, to understand the times, right? It's someone's perspective on what happened at that time, particularly if it's made in that time. And then we have people who might do retrospectives and go back. So you're all taking an art history course, right? Right now? And I'm sure knowing that Dr. Lichtenstein is teaching it, she's taught you how to interpret art. So what do you look at when you look at art? Composition. What else? Historical context. What's up? Visual context. Anything else? Symbolism. Okay, so on our journey today, I want you to be an art historian, thinking like a scientist, and thinking about what do we learn from this time period, and why is alchemy considered to be, here's your key point to this lecture, a characteristic of the algebraic mentality. Everybody with me? Okay, are you ready? We're going to switch between two different PowerPoints. I'm going to give you just a little bit of information to kind of get you set up from the back. So here's the definition of alchemy, just so you can take a look at it. It gives you the pronunciation, alchemy, all right, just to give you that context. And here are some of the definitions that you would find if you went to go look up the term alchemy. A form of chemistry. So I think we talked about that, right? A form of chemistry, right here. And a speculative philosophy practiced in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, and concerned principally with discovering methods for transmutating base metals into gold, and with finding a universal solvent as well as an elixir of life. So let's unpack that just a little bit. This definition was taken to really kind of reflect the time that the 10th grade is studying and where it's set in. I will say that it was practiced in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, but it actually came into being well before that. And we'll go back and look at that history because it actually came into being with the Egyptians and some of the work that they were doing. It's concerned with principally discovering methods for transmuting base metals into gold. What in the world does that mean to you? What does the word transmutating mean to you in this circumstance? Very important.
Changing one substance to another.
Changing one substance to another. Those of you who are science people in this audience, what does that sound like to you? Changing one substance to another. Well, it does sound like magic, I would agree. I think that science often feels like magic, actually. But in this case, think more scientifically about concepts. How do you define changes in science? What are the two sciences that we talk about, the two changes?
Reactions.
Well, we have reactions, but you can have reactions that yield one type of change or another type of change. Thank you, physical and chemical changes. Everybody aware of those from way back when? What's a physical change, what's a chemical change?
Physical changes where it sort of, physical changes where, to explain, but chemical changes where it changes on a molecular level.
Very good. So a chemical change results in a total transformation, right? I've changed my molecules around, their structure and everything, and I become something totally new with new properties. And the new properties are not only physical new properties, they're chemically new properties, right? Takes energy to occur and harder to change back unless you use another set of chemical processes to reverse it. As opposed to a physical change, where a physical change, I've not altered the chemical or the molecular structure, right? Take a piece of paper, I rip it in half. Still paper, just two pieces, right? Physical change. I burn the piece of paper, now what? Chemical or physical? Chemical, right? I've changed the structure of it completely. I added energy. I've changed the molecular alignment. Make sense? So if I think about then this definition, principally with discovering methods for transmuting base metals into gold, smacks me in the face of like a chemical change, doesn't it? These people were looking for a process to be able to take any old metal, lead for one, silver for another, and change it into gold. Well, that would be amazing. Why would that be amazing? What does it give me? Money. Who said that? Money. So go back to society, right? Society in general. If I don't have to trade for that kind of stuff, and I could just make it, I have the ability to have power, don't I? I have the ability to debase an entire currency system, don't I? Why wouldn't it work? Why did it never happen? Again, go back to your chemistry.
You have to change the number of protons.
I'd have to change the number of protons. What do we know about gold? Gold is a pure element, right? It's made up of a specific structure. I can't create an element. Elements can be put together to make other compounds, but I can't create it. It is a pure substance, okay? So they were on this road to try to do this. And think about this for a second. We're talking about in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance right now. Why would alchemy, which was flourishing up until this point, been pushed underground? Why would people have said, alchemists, bad?
Because they wanted to keep their power in their mouth.
Yeah, they were worried, right? If you had people who could figure this out, what happens to monarchs? What happens to these societies? They become nothing, right? So you have to figure out a way to push them underground. Push that underground. Make certain that you let people know that if they're practicing alchemy, they're akin to being a sorcerer, a witch, a magician, something we don't trust. All right, make sense? So at one point in history, and we'll go back to talk about this when you see some of the slides, there was this huge split between alchemy and chemistry. And chemistry gave rise to what we now consider today. But I can't look at chemistry without finding its roots in alchemy. They're connected, all right? And society, wherever it was at the time, changed the way it was perceived. Fair enough? Then there's this finding a universal solvent. What does that mean to you guys? Universal solvent. Water is a universal solvent. In fact, it's one of the most important ones. You guys wouldn't be on this planet without water. Dissolves things, right? Breaks them apart, breaks them down into smaller bits. Gives us the ability to take something that's really large and bring it down to something smaller. It allows chemicals to exist within it. All of that's important for life on the planet. What they're finding the solvent for had many different properties, okay? Then there's this other one we talked about as an elixir for life. That goes back to this idea of a philosopher's stone. It's essentially elixir in this case is to go to what Eli said, a magic potion, right? Something that I would drink that would allow me to live forever. By the way, are we still looking for that in today's society? Sure, different ways, right? Maybe not that elixir, but anybody who's just interested in cryogenics or anything like that, it's looking for a way to extend life or to have that afterlife, right? Okay, so then we go down to this definition. Any magical power or process of transmuting a common substance, usually of little value, into a substance of great value. So this goes back to, I think, what Maria or somebody told me in the beginning, is that I'm trying to take, maybe, or was it Allie? It was Allie. I'm trying to take any common metal and turn it into gold, right? I want to take something that's plentiful, that I can get as an easy, raw resource, and I want to transform it into something that has value. And if I can do that, I found power, right? Make sense? Okay, any questions so far? So let's go back on the historical timeline because it's really important to understand. And again, this is the first time it was really noted in history. And that is the idea that alchemy was in ancient Egypt where the word chem, you can see the root to chemistry as we know it today, was used in reference to the fertility of the floodplains around the Nile. Well, why would that make sense? Why would alchemy have a reference to the flood around the Nile? Take a guess. What do you know about the Nile? Yes? A little bit louder. Great. They were able to grow plants and crops because why? What did the Nile provide? Water and something else really important. Someone said it. Soil. What's in that soil? Minerals, right? If you have floodplains and you have stuff that's washing down a river and flooding out onto the plains, the places where you're planting, what happens? Rich soil, good planting grounds, right? So it is kind of like magic in a sense. All this stuff comes down, and now you have this rich place to be able to plant using the universal solvent of water, right? The Egyptians beliefs in life after death and the mummification procedures they developed probably gave rise to the rudimentary chemical knowledge and a goal of immortality. So think about that for a second. Mummifying isn't accidental. Maybe it was in the very beginning. Maybe someone figured out something because they left something outside for a while, the sun dried it out, and they looked at what was preserved and they had some ideas around it. But the Nile also was very important for this because of the salt that it provided, right? If you put salt inside of a body, what happens? It takes in the water, it desiccates it, it dries it out, it preserves it. So you start to see in life in general, as we all know, there's basic chemical processes that are always occurring, right? And those basic chemical processes become harnessed by humans, and we use them for other ways, and you think, wow, if I can mummify something, and I have the ability to preserve it, I have the ability to keep it whole or intact for its afterlife. So you start to see here the roots of the entire definition. Transmutating, changing one thing from another, universal solvents, the ability to have some sort of liquid that can hold on to all these chemicals that have great resources, and this ability to change something so you can preserve it forever, right? Again, I'm going to ask you to think for a second. If you think about modern day chemistry, How far off is it from that idea? Right? Think about the pharmaceutical companies today. Could I consider that a form of alchemy? Sure. What about the immunizations that they have in today's world now for cancer? That's what they're working on. Could that be consideration under these types of definitions? Yes? Okay. Jehoy, you with me? All right. So 332 BC, Alexander the Great. Everybody remember Alexander the Great? Why do we love Alexander the Great? Why is he somebody that we talk about? What was his legacy besides building empires? He spread cultures, right? He also created a library. And in that library, there were all sorts of scholarly articles from all different places that were translated and available to others to read. He also sent out people like Aristotle into the field and said, bring me back as many things as you can so I can learn about the world around me and I can preserve them. Okay? So if you think about him, he became interested in the Egyptian ways, so you start to see the train here, right? What happened in Egypt is now being looked at in other cultures, and you have a preservation and a fusion of knowledge that starts to move. Really important to what we're paying attention to. So we see here, interestingly enough, that an Egyptian sacred science was considered to be an Egyptian ancient science, and if you remember studying the arithmetic mentality, you might have learned that in the younger grades, the first thing they study in kindergarten is fire, earth, air, and water, the basic elements. And alchemy was based on those basic elements. If I can put those together, I have the ability to transmutate or to transform or to chemically change substances, right? Fire, that's energy. That's what causes change. Earth, that's where I'm getting my raw materials from to activate change, to work from. Air, well, you need air to get fire going. That oxidizes it, right? So you can have fire. And water, well, we talked about water already as being that universal solvent. And if you've ever paid attention to chemistry, you really can't do any chemical equation, any chemical reaction, anything without water in some form. Have any of you ever noticed that who've studied advanced chemistry? Water is everywhere. Okay? Take water out, no chemistry. So Egypt was occupied by the Arabs in the 7th century, and they added the word chema and el, and then we get alchema, meaning the black lands, all right? And they think that is the first origin of the true word alchemy. Make sense? And hence it's gone on and on from there. The introduction of alchemy to the West came in the 8th century when the Arabs brought it into Spain. Does anybody remember what that whole movement was when we started bringing things into Spain? It was actually the precursor to the Renaissance as we think about the Italian Renaissance. Anybody remember what that was that you might have studied in 9th grade? Maybe at the end of 8th grade and into grade 9. La Convencia, right? You guys remember that? Where everybody was coming into one area again, you had this fusion of ideas that were happening, all right? And you have the Arabian belief that the metals were made up of mercury and sulfur. Please pay attention to mercury and sulfur. They play a really important role in alchemy, and they play a really important role in symbolism, which we'll get to in just a minute, okay? But if you think even about those two words, think about mercury in particular, where else do you hear the word mercury as it relates to cultures?
It's a god.
Gods, right? The god Mercury is considered what? Is he powerful? Yeah. He's high up on that order, okay? So that means Mercury must have some special elements. How many of you ever, well, you guys can't do this as much in today's world, and when I was growing up, you could do it all the time. How many of you have ever seen a sample of mercury or played with mercury, or seen people play with mercury online? What do you know about mercury?
Liquid.
It's liquid at room temperature, right? And what does it appear to look like? It's a silver blob. It's awesome. It's like one of the coolest things. And it kind of moves around on its own and it literally blobs together. It's the best way of describing it. It clumps and it rolls. And it rolls almost in a spherical shape. So just think for a second. If you knew nothing about mercury and you encountered it in nature in that form, what would you think? Pretty cool, right? Magic. Mercury is naturally occurring. Find a natural point of a mercury vein, reservoir, whatever it is, and you see it in that format, that's pretty cool. There's only one other substance that's pretty cool that's related to it that some of you might have played with at some point in your science career here, and it is called Fields metal. Anybody ever played with Fields metal? It's an alloy. You can look at it online. It's safe. It's non-toxic. You can get a sample of it to play with. It's actually in all of our sprinkler systems. And it's this alloy, which means a combination of metals. And when you put them together, they mimic some of the properties of mercury. And it is another substance that's hard at room temperature. But when you put it into hot water, unlike mercury, it goes into a liquid phase but looks like mercury. It rolls around like it. When you throw it back onto a cold table, it immediately hardens. So it has a much lower melting and boiling point than real mercury. But again, it's a form of similar properties. Then we had the scientific revolution. Everybody know about the scientific revolution? What does that mean to you? Oh my goodness. Grade 9, grade 10. Continuing. What's the scientific revolution in your mind? Why was it so, wow?
All of these key scientific figures examine the world.
Yeah. Key scientific figures examine the world, right? They look at it differently. Who are some of those keys? Newton? Everybody remember Newton? Galileo? Kepler? Bacon? Da Vinci? Who? Tycho Brahe? Hooke? Anybody else? Franklin? Right? Who? Copernicus. All of these people, what were they doing differently now than they were before? What's up? Empiricism. Okay? What does empiricism mean to you? Knowledge gained through experience. I'm doing to learn, I'm looking to learn, I'm experimenting to learn. What does that sound like to you? Science today. Modern day science, right? So this shows you a timeline, and at this point what happens is when you start to get to the Renaissance era, and again, why we have this particular study of alchemy happening between grade 8 and into grade 9, and for you guys to think about the transformation from the geometric mentality to the algebraic mentality is because you start to have the shift towards an empirical reasoning as well. But it's not just empirical reasoning, and it's not just about sharing, it's also about symbolism. Because what happens during this time frame is all of a sudden chemistry and alchemy are kind of co-evolving at the same time, but they have principles in common with each other. And if you think about just for a second, periodic table. What is the periodic table? It's a list of symbols, right? And if you look at modern day periodic tables and you look at the beginning of the periodic table, it actually was just a great big database. But that database was based on a universal symbolic system where you and I and others from all different cultures, no matter where we learn in the world, we could all have a conversation around those symbols. It means the same similar thing, right? So you start to see at this point when alchemy and chemistry are co-evolving and alchemy at some point starts to get pushed down and chemistry starts to rise up, you see in between this time period this real base, this real faith in terms of looking at symbolism as a way of communicating for two reasons. What might be the two reasons? Why might I start shifting towards symbolic coding for all of my chemistry or for all of my alchemical processes? Again, put yourself in the time period, historical context. I'm moving from this time frame of out of Islamic Empire into the early Renaissance periods. Why would symbolism become important now? Two possible reasons. What do you mean by that? Can you take that further?
If you wanted like a record of all the known chemicals, a lot of them are very, very dangerous and are hard to obtain. You couldn't really keep it all on a desk.
Okay, so it's a record keeping, and it's kind of shorthand, right? Symbology becomes a shorthand way of recording that. So that would be one thing. So for record keeping, take that a little bit further. Why do I care if I have records? I mean, I could be like other people and just hold that knowledge myself. So why do I care if I have records? Other people can use it. So I can now share the knowledge, right? It becomes a universal way for me to have a conversation with someone else about that knowledge. I just have to learn the symbology. There's one other reason, and a little bit more circuitous of reason, yeah?
Because it develops over time, and one generation is not able to develop everything, and we have to pass the knowledge to that.
Right, it almost becomes a form of written or oral tradition where I can pass knowledge along, right? And the other thing that's really important about it is I can read it, because I was trained to read it, and I can train someone else to read it, but not everyone can read it. So if I'm pretty close, and to me, this kind of starts to feel like intellectual property rights or patents, if you want to say that. That means if I'm pretty close to figuring out how to transmutate lead into gold, or I'm pretty close to finding that elixir of life so I can live forever, I may not want to share that with everyone. And I may not want everyone to know that. So by putting it into a symbolic format, I'm protecting my knowledge, right? Make sense? Okay. We already talked about what comes to mind for this. So we'll move past this. But I just want you to see this one thing again, because I think this goes back to what you said in the beginning, to reform your thoughts for a minute. So alchemy, to summarize so far what we talked about, I consider science to be an art. How many of you think of science as an art form as well as being what we consider traditional science? Anybody else in the room consider science and art to have shared processes? I mean, if you're actually working on a scientific experiment, it's a design challenge. And within a design challenge, there's always an artistic perspective that comes into being. And I think it's interesting if you look at some of the greatest artists and you talk to them about, or some of the greatest scientists either, and you talk to them about how they found their road to discovery, it usually involves one or the other disciplines. So think about that as we go through this as well. But it's an art by which parts of the cosmos can be liberated from their temporal existence and attain states of perfection. So we're going to another level. Gold, perfection, pure, power, beautiful, value, okay? And for humans, so I might look at something that comes from the earth resources from that standpoint, but for me, what is that state of perfection? It's that ability to live forever, immortality. I've reached that pinnacle where I'm just gonna be here forever and ever, okay? And I'm gonna have a conversation that will go with it. So, why is it not moving? Let's look at some of the equipment. I think this is really fascinating. This is a look at a traditional alchemical setup that would have come out of, actually, the time frame for that picture would be around the Islamic Empire, or moving into early Renaissance. And this is modern day, okay? So what do you notice? They're similar structures, right? Very similar. I mean, this might look a little bit more archaic, it should. This looks a little bit more sophisticated, it should. But here's what you need to know. How many of you were here in 8th grade science? When you might have studied, you guys study alchemy in 8th grade science at the time you were here, and you might have worked on distillation, where you're making perfumes or whatnot? Anybody? Maybe we hadn't done that yet, okay? The process of distillation, the ability to take something and make it pure, that's what we're talking about. So I'm gonna boil off all the impurities. So how many of you know what distillation means? This is a distillation setup, right? Right here. So I have a liquid in here, my universal solvent water. I'm boiling it away. Here's the heat. And as I heat the water, as you know, it goes to phase change, physical phase change, liquid to gas. When it goes into the gaseous phase, I leave everything behind that I don't want that's impure, and I'm left with the purity. And then when it trickles down this tube here, it cools, and I'm left here with the essence, the pure essence, okay? You and I would know nothing about distillation if it hadn't been for the alchemists. In fact, the entire process of distillation came out of alchemy during the Islamic Empire. And not only the entire process, but here's where art comes into it in my mind, is the actual equipment. If I'm going to distill something, not only did I have to figure out how to do it, I had to figure out how to make the containers, the canisters, the vials, the flasks, whatever it is, to also do it. I had to blow my glass, literally, to get it to be able to make this. That's art. That's amazing. Today's world, I just call Word Scientific, and they send me 1,000 milliliter size containers, which we call Erlenmeyer flasks, okay? Make sense? So the equipment from the old is still preserved in the new, and it has a special function, and they actually made the equipment to meet the function or the desire for what they were trying to produce to make a pure substance. That's cool. Chemistry and alchemy go hand in hand. If I didn't have alchemy, I wouldn't have chemistry. All right? Here are some of the famous things that you should pay attention to if you ever did any reading. Some names that you think about are really important. So we want to pay things or that people that we're looking at. So this gentleman here, Hermes, he was really best known for trying to combine the Greek and the Egyptian gods and all their practices and science into one, okay? So this idea, I'm going to put everything together, I'm going to take the best of the best, and I'm going to get even better, all right? The second one, Zumius, he was best known for being able to start first coming up with the first recorded references of alchemy, the first written texts that we would look back at, okay? Down below that, we look over here, Albertus Magnus, I can never say that name correctly. He was actually looking at more of the mystical side of it. He's the one who's looking for that elixir of life, or the first one who was talking about the Philosopher's Stone. We need to go out and find the Philosopher's Stone. If we do, we're going to have life forever. Geber, many of you might have known Geber from your earlier studies. He was really the person that we look at during the Islamic times, and was the first real alchemist that was celebrated for being an alchemist. I mean, that was basically his title, okay? And if we move on from there, let's go to some alchemical beliefs. So this is where we start to get into symbology, and you want to really start thinking about, again, that the whole idea of the algebraic mentality is this universal notation, or this idea of symbology and the importance of it. So we've already talked about this. I'm repeating it so that you guys can hear it and get it in your mind, so pay attention, please. Transmutation of metals, changing from one form to another. I'm trying to get to higher, more purified state. That's my goal. Some of them tried to keep their work secret from others, and they had no method for communicating discoveries. Okay? I want you to know, I want some of you to know, because I think you can offer me some insights, but I don't want everyone to know. I want to make certain I protect my goods, right? Not very uncommon in today's world, what we talk about with intellectual property rights all the time. They had no underlying chemical theory to guide experimentation. So if I started keeping records, I didn't have to go back to square one. I could start moving from a different point to be able to get to that final endpoint faster. Make sense? And they believe all matter was based around the tria prima. And you might have heard about this if any of you ever took any of Earl's courses. He talked about this in a couple of his courses. And my tria prima that I'm looking for is salt, sulfur, and mercury. They were believed to have the power. If I can combine those together, I'm going to get something really amazing in terms of what I'm looking for. And we start to see here the beginning of the symbology. This is actually a flask that had alchemical potions in it. You want to pay attention to the fact that we have this figure here. This is also supposed to be kind of like a dragon-like. So what does this remind you of here? What do you see in that? No right answer. You guys feel free. What do you see? There's 3 heads. Really important. Why do you think there's 3 heads, Allie? Yeah, it represents these 3. So all of a sudden, if I start to get my symbology, I can show you a 3-headed dragon, and right away you should be able to, if you're talking the same language as I am, no, I'm speaking about salt, sulfur, and mercury. And the colors are going to be relevant then, right? Yeah, Maria.
The sign of Mercury is connected to the Mirror of Venus.
I don't know. That's a really good question. Ms. Lichtenstein might know. Is this connected to the mural of Venice, do you know, this symbology? We'll look it up. Good question, reference it, okay? Anybody else notice anything? Oren?
The 3 heads are red, black, and white, which are the 3 faces, red, black, and white faces.
Yeah, excellent, okay? Anybody else? All right. So today, you and I, we're kind of boring. We use laboratory notebooks, right? I mean, I still use images. I think images tell more stories than words, okay? Alchemists use cryptic language or symbolism, and elaborate drawings describe what's happening. By the way, so do scientists today. Well, that's why we have 1,000,002 chemical equations, because that's how we're telling it. Cryptic language describes everything if you know how to unpack it. So let's take a look at some of these pictures I'm going to share with you, see what you think. Again, I want you to look at it not only as a piece of art, but I want you to unpack it. What do you notice in this image? What do you think is relevant? No right or wrong answers. Those of you who haven't spoken yet and you have an artistic side, here's your moment. What do you notice?
2 suns.
2 suns, okay. Everybody see the 2 suns right here? Well, I'm having problems with the pointer. Up here on the top, 1 sun, the other sun, okay? But they're entirely different from one another. Why? They're representing different things, okay? What else do you notice? Say it again. Where do you see fire and water? Fire at her feet, right? water right here, and in back here. I don't know, I can't tell as well, but right in here. So notice the fire. Notice the color of the sun. Notice this. Notice the color of the sun. Anything else? 2 people. All right? We have a person right here, person right here. How would you describe them? Are they same? Are they different? Different in what way? Dress. What's different about the dress? Collar. Who's wearing a collar? Oh, color. Color. Okay, sorry. Color. So red, kind of a bluish tone. Anything else? Yes, Sako. Say it again. They're kind of opposites. Okay, great. They do look like kind of opposites. Anything else? Female and male, okay, maybe. Definitely harder to tell from this time period, but very possible, right? Okay, anything else? So, now let's take it to another level. You've unpacked it a little bit. So, what do we think about here if you think about this in terms of symbology now? Translate your thoughts for a second and take what you see here as symbology and put it to what we've already talked about that has more of a chemical root to it. So let's pay attention to this. This sun reminds me of the color of silver, right? Could that be then a symbol for silver, right? And this represents more, hard to say, I think this is supposed to be the female. So this is the female representing silver, okay? This represents what? This sun. Gold. This is the male, right? So tell me, what do you know about hierarchical relationships? Who's probably higher in this image? Who do you think has the power? The male, right? So if I unite male and female, if I unite silver and gold, I'm getting to a place of more power. I can transmutate one from another more easily. Does that make sense? So this image is very well giving us a reference to that. Now notice, in order to go to gold, what do I need? I need fire. I need heat. In order to be able to take my silver and start to go through a transmutation process, what do I need? I need water. So I need my elemental forces, and I need these powers to be able to transmutate to something new. Does that make sense? What about the symbology around the outside? Do you think any of this means anything? Natural world. Very good. I'm going to take this from nature. I'm going to look for my raw materials in nature to be able to make this process happen. Okay? Does that make sense to you? All right. Take a look at this image. It's a little bit fuzzy, sorry. But what do you notice in this image of what's happening? What does it look like to you? A lion eating a sun. Okay? One of my favorite images. Last name lion has some significance to me. So what do you think this represents? Why would a lion be eating a sun? What do you take from that? What does lion mean to you? What is a representation symbolically of a lion? Say it again. The king. Arr! Right? Or the queen sometimes. Lionesses. So I have a king. I have the powerful figure. What about the sun? The divine. Okay? Again, that power, your gold, working towards that. So if I read this image, this lion is eating the sun. Take me to a different level of interpretation. Put yourself into the framework of trying to tell someone something that you don't want the whole world to know. What could eating something actually represent? Incorporating. Beautiful. I'm pulling it in. It's a transmutation. I'm changing it. What is the process by which I'm doing it? I'm putting it into my mouth. Be really literal. What do you know about the insides of your mouth, guys? Solvent. Universal solvent. Okay? So I'm going to dissolve something to get to something new, right? So in this case, usually when you see a lion in representation like this, it's actually representing something that we all know about in science, and that is it's becoming an acid. All right? It represents an acid. What do we know about acids in chemistry? Think about hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid in particular.
Very good at dissolving things.
They are very good at dissolving things. They are powerful acids. Where do you have hydrochloric acid on a daily basis? Anybody know? In your digestive tract, in your stomach. Not to be gross, but that's why if you throw up, your throat burns, right? You just throw up all that hydrochloric acid. It's going to burn your throat. So part of what happens. So in this case, if I'm thinking about this literally then, when I see a lion, I'm going to interpret that as I need some sort of strong dissolvent. I need a solvent that will allow me to be able to break something down. And as we know, those of you who've played with chemistry, acids are really good at corroding or breaking down, okay? And if it's a lion, it means I'm looking for the strongest acid, not just a minuscule acid. I'm looking for the big kahuna acid right here, okay? Make sense? Sulfuric or otherwise. And so in this case, I'm looking for the idea of dissolution, which is one of the processes we use to be able to start transforming things. Take a look at this image, okay? What do you notice in this one?
The woman's holding the sulfur salt.
Beautiful. Very few people see that right away. Okay, do you see the three little flowers right here? That's representing the sulfur and the salt and the mercury, okay? And the colors mean something in this case. So again, it's representing each one of them. So it's either telling me I need to have those, and because, here's another level of it, those of you who understand how to read chemical equations, if I think about this from a proportion level, it's telling me they're in equal proportions. I have a 1-to-1 ratio in this case. Does that make sense? One flower of each color. What else do you notice? Fire, fire, fire. So why do you think that's important? Two representations of fire in one image. What do you think? I need multiple fires at the same time, multiple processes perhaps, maybe more than one reaction that's going to happen. And if you notice, the fires are controlled by different entities. So there's different entities involved in these fires. What else could that mean? Combination of different substances, right? Separate processes that I'm looking at. Okay, what else do you notice about this? It's a little bit hard to see, but look right here. Can anybody make out what that is that she's holding? A peacock feather. That is not there by accident. What do you know about peacock feathers? Say it again? No? Peacock feathers. What do they look like? How many of you seen a peacock before? Do you know what I mean when I say peacock? It's a great big showy bird who spreads its tail. And when it spreads its tail, you see each of the individual feathers, gorgeous colors. Ah, beautiful. Representation of power. Peacocks are also a representation not only of power, but oftentimes of royalty. Not everybody's going to have a peacock in their backyard, right? So in this case, the belief is, in terms of people who have interpreted this, is that because this is incredibly colorful, it is representing a high level of alchemical change. It's telling me that I'm at the height of a process. So let's go back to that conversation we had in the beginning. Chemical changes are often represented by multiple color changes, aren't they? If you've watched a reaction go through a process, particularly anything that involves a universal solvent of any type, it goes through a series of possible color changes before it gets to its final product, right? This is a way of indicating that a chemical change will occur, and then I'm looking for it in different ways. So here, when you look at this, the wolf is representing one type of a base substance, one type of metal. They say that usually this gentleman here, who is carrying the scythe, he is usually representing lead. This is an image that's showing me that I'm going to go from lead through a chemical process using these three elements to trying to make, with fire, okay, I'm trying to make, in the end, gold. It's showing me a representation for that. Does that make sense to everyone? And it's probably more than one process I have to go through. Okay. Here's a totally different image. What do you think about this one? This is actually, has a very different representation to it, but it's still in that same vein of trying to communicate. What do you notice? The crow. Crow or raven, right? What do you know about crows and ravens in terms of symbology? Blackface, okay. They can bring bad news. Some people will say something else. The circle does look somewhat like a womb, doesn't it? It's enclosing it within a sphere, so within a system. Crows and ravens oftentimes are also associated with wisdom. My sister loves having crows in her backyard. She says it is a sign that it's a wise house. She always has crows, too. I'm wondering if she plants them there, just so that we all believe that when we go. So that is one of the things to pay attention to. What else do you notice? Pay attention to what's happening around the outside. Just follow my pointer around. Think about what you can interpret from here. I could also go this way.
There's a sign for Mercury.
Okay, sign for Mercury, absolutely. What else do you notice?
Application of heat and air.
Application of heat and air, good, right. I'm warming something up, I'm cooling something down. So I'm going through possibly a boiling process and a cooling process within a contained substance. So again, it could be a representation of distillation process, right, that we talked about in the beginning, when you saw that thing where I'm heating it up and then I trickle off the pure substances to cool it back down. What else do you notice in this? Say it again? Male and female symbols, which we've talked about before too, in terms of having the unity of both to get to purity, right? So again, that could be related here in terms of whatever potion I'm trying to make. Anything else? I mean, how many of you find this character with these coming out kind of interesting and weird all at the same time? What does that mean to you? What do you think when you see that? I mean, he kind of looks like what? He looks like he's sort of dying, doesn't he? He doesn't look like he's in the prime of his life. And he has this crow sitting on him, and there's this heat around him, and there's this cooling phase, and then there's these vectors shooting out of his mouth to these angel-like figures. How would you interpret that? Thoughts?
Heat up and cool down, old man. Whatever the old man symbolizes.
Yeah, I'm heating up and I'm cooling down this old man, and I get these two things, so let's just take it to the next level. To me, this represents that magic potion, that elixir of life. If I can figure out how to take this old man, and by using mercury and others and heating and cooling processes, I might have the ability to have him change into that immortality, into the immortal being, right? So this is talking something about what that elixir of Philosopher's Stone is. That would allow me to live forever and ever and ever. Drink this magic potion and your life will never end, right? Okay. So, final quote for you to think about, and then we'll wrap up. When the philosophers speak of gold and silver from which they extract their matter, are we to suppose that they refer to the vulgar gold and silver? By no means. Vulgar silver and gold are dead, while those of the philosophers are full of life. Paracelsus, who was one of our early alchemists. So we are constantly thinking about, when we talk about chemistry and we talk about alchemy, the basis of that is understanding how matter changes, right? They're related to each other. Alchemy gave rise to chemistry. Alchemy brought with it a symbolic notation to be able to look at what's happening in a small format, to be able to repeat it, to be able to share it with others who had similar knowledge, those who had the same language as I did. The goal was to be able to try to create purity, whether that be purity of form, purity of life, purity of being, right? And as I said before, if you think about chemistry in today's world and its applications, you're oftentimes looking for the same thing. You're looking for purity of life. What helps you live a healthy life? How do we create more of this? How do we create new substances that will yield longer lifespans, not only for us, but for products? How do we safely dispose of things? How do we make certain that the breakdown process isn't toxic? All of those same questions are really not that much different than maybe what we saw in the early forms of alchemy that gave rise to chemistry. So, the point being, in order to look at any modern day science today, always go back to its roots, because there's people well before you and I who had already started playing with us and who set the stage for the innovations and the technology and the understandings that we have today. We wouldn't be as far as we are without the work of folks from many, many centuries ago. So, I ask of you, when you walk the hallways of Ross and you look at the images down the hallways, look at them from more than one perspective. Pay attention to what you see, because within many images, there's symbology of secrets, there's symbology of stories, and there's ways of understanding the past to understand where you are today. I hope you enjoyed alchemy. Thank you.